And we're back. I'm Terry Cooke. You're watching Hamilton's Vital Signs. And as always, we're talking about stuff that's happening in Hamilton. I am really pleased to welcome Annie Kidder to the show. Annie's the Executive Director of People for Education. Annie, you have been described as one of Canada's greatest advocates for public education. Happens to be a personal bias of mine because I grew up around a family of teachers. We're doing some work together. Your organization that is really a champion for public education, connecting that to the prosperity of communities, and the Hamilton Community Foundation. But before we get to any of that really important stuff, I want to talk a little bit about you and how you came to be involved in the work that you're doing. So give me a little bit of biographical stuff about Annie Kidder.
Well, it's funny because I still sometimes wonder. I lived in a lot of places across Canada, went to a lot of schools, 12. So maybe that, somehow the love of education comes from that. In my family growing up, because we moved all the time, my father was in mining, there was a lot of attention paid to reading and imagination and thinking. And so I like public education, but when I grew up, I became an actor and a theater director, not a very good one. But then I got involved in my children's school, and I think that somewhere in there, I gained a love of the kind of community that there was in my children's school, and the possibilities in my children's school. And because I am a really diehard Canadian too. I think I always assumed the connection between what kind of country we were and that we had public education. It was just like part of who we are as Canadians. And when this organization, the sort of glimmerings of this organization began more than 20 years ago, there was a sense in Ontario that public education was under a bit of a threat. There was a lot of fighting going on, there were cuts to funding and a lot of crankiness.
So root this in time and place.
Yeah.
So what school was?
Oh, my children went to a school in downtown Toronto called Palmerston. Wonderful, still is, community school. And I knew when we first decided that was the school that I wanted to be one of those mothers sitting on the bench. I wanted that sense of community. So I had a deep attachment to the school, and I think that the combination of the attachment to the school and the kind of, and again the sort of sense of community it built, and then contrasting that, I guess, with a government that got elected and came in on it was the common sense revolution on a platform of cutting, and I think picking a lot of fights, but fights
with teachers.
With teachers in particular. And I think that both sides, in a way, and sometimes the fights weren't just with teachers, sometimes with school boards with the provincial government, that at that time, there was a sense that every conversation about public education was a kind of polarized debate. And for some of us in that school and, that neighborhood in downtown Toronto, there was a concern that there was nobody kind of speaking for the system, and that nobody was watching out for what was actually happening in schools. And we totally naively, I think, went, we're going to do that. We're going to be the kind of, and not sort of the voice, but we're going to try to add some kind of objectivity to the conversations about education. And I think the one thing we did that was, incredibly right at that time was we knew that evidence was important. We knew two things. It was important to be able to tell the story of what was going on in schools, and that you had to have evidence as opposed to just your big mouthy opinion about it. So we developed a survey that eventually, went to all the schools in the province so that we could say, when either side would say, this is happening or this is happening, or, we like children better, we could go, well, the evidence is that, of what percent of schools had music teachers or guidance counselors, or what the waiting list for special ed were. And it gave us a kind of platform then, I think, from which to operate. And for me, I went, I found the thing I was good at and that I loved. And I think that over the years for me, that sort of care about and sense of the importance of public education to all of us, not just parents, not just people who work in the education system, but to every one of us, has actually grown and grown over the years.
So I have to tell you, you've just taken me back, because in that same time and place, I was still in political office at the time, and became this region's representative on something called the Who Does What Task Force, along with our friends David Crombie and Hazel McCallion and a number of other folks who you would remember. And we spent the better part of 2 years at 777 Bay Street looking at the disentanglement of provincial and municipal services, and came to what we thought was a very logical outcome to improve accountability and really make the relationships more transparent between the province and municipalities. And of course, as we presented our unanimous recommendations, the then provincial government got into this colossal fight and decided that their imperative was to take over educational funding to get better control of school boards, which they thought were running amok. And lo and behold, that 2 years of my life is 2 years that I'm never getting back. But
but I've forgotten about the Who Does What, because it was a really important, not just an exercise. It was really important to understand still is, though.
And I was really proud of that work. And
maybe we should go back and find that report.
You know, David Crombie would tell you it was maybe the best piece of his long and distinguished public career. And as one of the relatively young members of that group, I learned so much about both the positive side of people who really care about public institutions, and the negative times of things about how politics can often screw that up, right? So tell us about the startup of People for Education, because you know, clearly there was a passion, an alignment, a cause, but this actually was something that didn't exist until you figured a way to make something happen that built some capacity over time. So talk just a little bit about the organization.
I think that, you know, because it started without the intention of starting an organization that was going to last for 20 years. So it really started with how do we let it be known to the world that there are problems here. So at the beginning we did, and a lot of us came from sort of artsy backgrounds. So we knew, for one thing, getting the media was an important part of this. So as opposed to a lot of Canadians who are more sort of shy and retiring and feel that it's embarrassing and wrong to, you know, send out press releases for whatever you're doing, we learned quite quickly. And even now I don't even know how, but there was a lot of, and it was before I didn't have a computer at home. So it's like, you know, getting a fax machine and sitting there faxing out press releases, and finding various slightly embarrassing ways to call attention to the, one of the first things we did before People for Education ever existed, was we had this thing from our school, a few local schools, with I don't even know if I should be telling this story, because it was in the olden days when people let you do anything. We took all the kids from our school, or maybe all the grade sixes, maybe they were older, they were old kids, to Queen's Park, and they were elves against the cuts, because there were a lot of cuts to education. And we had, my husband is Eric Peterson, the actor, so he was Scrooge, and he made this big speech about who is this man who would be Scrooge. We had Santa Claus, we had letters, but we thought, that's kind of how we operated at the beginning. It was, you know, finding a way to, and for the media, they liked us because we did fun things, but then they liked us very quickly because we had facts, we had data, and they could trust us. And so it morphed in that over the course of the first sort of 2 years, first from being a pretty activist group concerned about what was going on. And I think, Ian, it's been a long evolution to where we are now. But I think quite quickly we felt, anyway, that it was really important that there be somebody on the outside, in a way. And I think about it way more now, about why it's important that there are kind of independent organizations to kind of watch over or support or work on our public institutions.
So let me push you on that, because and we're about 2 minutes from break. But when I think about both your profile, the work you've done, the body of work, and People for Education, you certainly would be perceived to be broadly on the progressive side of the political spectrum, but not partisan, and in an environment in which it really is fraught, the politics of education, more so than just about anything else I can think of. You've somehow managed to navigate that middle ground where you can be an advisor to the Premier of Ontario, who on any given day is popular or not, and yet not be clearly identified to be carrying anybody's water politically. And just talk about that, how you maintain that independence and frankly be a constructive critic without turning into a partisan hack.
Well, and I think it's a really good point. And I think some days everybody's mad at us, and that's when we know we're doing well. It's like, okay, now we've got, and education is incredibly political, and it's not just political, sort of capital P, political in terms of parties. It's very political inside in terms of who has power, who's negotiating what hidden agenda is going on. And I have to say, I actually find that really hard to navigate in. I always want to go, could you just tell me out loud what's happening here? But I think for us, we've really kind of stuck to our guns ourselves as an organization about what we will and what we won't say. We question, we think really, really, really hard before we say things out loud. We've gotten into trouble sometimes with, we've had, school boards as a group mad at us, or teachers' federations as a group mad at us. The provincial government also sometimes very, you said this and it's not fair. But because we really have been really tried so hard to maintain our independence, I think we have managed to stay sort of outside of it, and we've managed to be, and I think the hardest thing is to be a critical friend. So to go, we love public education, we care about it, we think it's vitally important, we like lots of work that the government's doing, but we're also very critical of parts of it, and so we try.
And I have to tell you, at the Community Foundation, where we manage collaboration every day, I often say, collaboration only works if we can be honest about what we're not happy with each other about, and how we need to change, and that has to be reciprocal. And sometimes in the desire to play nice, that's a difficult thing for polite people to do. So
but it's a really I think it's an incredibly important thing to do, and I think sometimes we get stuck thinking we have to be on a side, or that we just have to be polite the whole time, and and not have the critical part and the critical friend, and be honest in that way.
And on that note, we're going to go to a quick break. I'm with Annie Kidder from People for Education. We're talking about good things happening in Ontario and here in Hamilton, and I'm Terry Cooke. You're watching Hamilton's Vital Signs. We'll be right back.
As a little girl, I always loved this time of year. The parades, the baking, the Christmas tree, and most importantly, spending time with family and friends. So from Long Point to Lowbanks, from Caledonia to Calvin and Cortland, I want to wish you a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year ahead, and I hope that your tree this year is surrounded by those that you hold most dear.
I started drinking more to deal with stress. Without my realizing it, alcohol took over my life. Finding the courage to go to that first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous was the best thing I've done. I got help from people who know what I've been through. Now I have hope. Alcoholics Anonymous. If alcohol is causing problems in your life, look for us. You can find us in the phone book or on the web at aa.org.
And we're back. Terry Cooke, you're watching, it's Hamilton's Vital Signs you're watching. See, I lost it there right in mid. And Annie Kidder from People for Education is with us. Let's talk about what we're doing well in education in the province. Let's talk a little bit about what we are doing together in Hamilton, and then I want to talk about what we need to do differently or better, and of course, measurement and EQAO, the bane of every student and parent and teacher's existence. So
that's a lot of things.
It is, and you can start anywhere with the stream of.
I think it's important that we are doing well, and that we're really lucky to live in Ontario and/or Canada. 95% of our kids go to public school, and they go to them because they're good. Our kids do well, on the narrow measures we have compared to the rest of Canada or the rest of the world. And they are learning amazing things. There's great work going on in schools. I think that what do we need to be doing in terms of moving forward? We all live in this complex world. We watch TV. We go, are we going to last? Yep. And I think that to that end...
What are they doing in Alabama tonight?
Exactly. Things like that. No, I mean, driving here, I listened, you listen to the news and you're just going, I listened to a whole thing about climate change and, Alabama, all of those things. And you go, okay, what kind of next generation do we need to deal with the complexity of the world? And maybe every single person as they get older goes, things are changing faster and faster, but it feels as if change is happening very fast right now. So we have to make sure that for us, for society, we are, whatever the right word is, building the next generation we need to be able to deal with the incredible polarization in the world, the extremism, climate change, Alabama, hopefully never not electing, sorry to be really political here, but presidents that like the person who has been elected, to try and make the world better than it is right now, fair, sustainable, all those things. So I think we have a little bit of catching up to do in that way, and we have to really work on that hard in our schools so that we're not still stuck. Education, as you know, it's not just political. It's big. Yeah. So it's kind of slow to shift, probably. Yeah. And it doesn't take radical change, but it takes paying attention to the fact that kids are going to have, going to change jobs lots of times, that the jobs they're going to have don't even exist right now, that it's no use training them with kind of hard skills to do things because they need to be able to learn how to learn, and they need to be able to think and imagine and empathize and be resilient and persist. That's what they need. You can learn the skills to a certain extent, however old you are. So I think that in Ontario we're doing well, but we need to keep progressing, and we need to worry, to your measurement point, about defining success in education by how our kids are doing on reading, writing, and math, because that's not enough, for one thing. And also, if we get too head up about those scores, we miss the big picture. We miss whether or not they can think creatively and critically and solve problems and understand diversity and work with other people. So we have to make some shifts, I'd say, in Ontario that way.
I want to ask you about testing, because I was at your conference recently. You had the new CEO of EQAO there, and one of the points she made that was compelling to me, and there's lots of teachers in the audience some of whom would believe that they should Deep Six that tomorrow, but she said the focus particularly on those schools that face the greatest socioeconomic challenges would never have been as intense, nor the commitment to doing things better or remediating those challenges in the absence of some independent method of doing that. Now, so talk to me a little bit about that part of the very difficult equation, which is, frankly, kids in schools in segregated low-income neighborhoods continue to struggle. They often don't get the resources they need, and at the very least, shining a light on that issue compels all of us to think about what do we need to do to better service those kids in those schools.
I think it's true that it's important that we have data, it's important that we have information. I'm not sure that we need to test every single solitary student in the province in grade 3, 6, 9, and 10 in order to know that. And I also think that, yes, we have that information now, but I'm not sure it's actually moved the needle that much. So we have the information now that kids, that socioeconomic status is going to have an impact on how you're, but it still has an impact. Right. So I'm not sure having the knowledge has changed the outcome in a way, and to segue not too awkwardly to the work that the Hamilton Community Foundation is doing. You should be. Well, because I think that that's the important part. And I have a lot of admiration for the new head of the EQAO, and I think it is important that we have an independent body that is looking at how the system is doing and providing information. But I think as important is trying to understand what makes a difference. Yeah. So it's part of and that is my slightly awkward segue, but part of the reason for doing conducting initiatives like Hamilton's doing and trying to look at what makes a difference on the ground. Because it's one thing to know, school X has a lower percentage of students who are meeting the provincial standard than school Y. Great, now we know it, but what are we going to do about it? And I think that's the most important part. So I'm not sure that I buy that we wouldn't have known any other way, because we did know. I think it's very important that we assess a lot of different things. at a provincial level, but I also think it's really important that we really look hard at what makes a difference, what works, what supports students who are more likely to struggle to be excited about school, to want to go to school, and to want to, and that builds their capacity to keep on learning.
So let's.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this is kind of like a filibuster. I'm going to run out of time, and I have so much more to ask you. But we've got maybe 3 minutes left. And I want you to focus a little bit on what do we know from the evidence and what are we trying to do in places like Hamilton collaboratively to try and improve the potential outcomes for all kids, and particularly those kids who really do face some at times overwhelming challenges.
Well, I think one of the things we know from the evidence is that when you do a measurement, there's a thing called the early development instrument. So when you, and this is not testing, but so when you assess kids when they're first coming into school, 4 or 5, 6 years old, 4 or 5 years old, on their kind of communication skills, their ability to, have relationships with other kids, the kind of all the things you need just to operate in a school. The kids who come from some, from lower, I hate that term, socioeconomic. So they're struggling with families living in poverty. Maybe their parents have less education, but they're coming from some deprivation at home. They score lower on all those things. So I think that what the proverbial we know is we have to work intentionally on those areas. And I think what's interesting about the work that Hamilton Community Foundation is doing with the school boards here is the thinking about, it's not, my sense is it's not about trying to get their test scores up in grade 3 or 6 or 9, but more how do we kind of mitigate all those things. So how do we provide the supports that are going to build those communication skills, those relationship skills, their ability to kind of navigate education so that they're able to get the best out of it. And I think that's where hope lies, that in really looking at how we, and it's not, it's kind of about leveling the playing field, but, I'm a totally imperfect parent, but I went to university and there are lots of books in our house and I can buy my kids, drama lessons or piano lessons or to be involved in sports extracurricularly. And all of those things build their competencies to be able to be successful in the world. And there's evidence now from Toronto, not from Hamilton, but that those scores, those early development scores, are more of a predictor of whether or not you go on to post-secondary education than anything else, including your scores on EQAO tests. So it's looking at those kinds of areas that we don't normally look at. It's like, how do we just, reading, writing, and math are very important, obviously, but just focusing on that isn't actually doing the trick.
And great teachers continue to make a difference.
Absolutely. And there are great teachers, too.
I am so sad that we are out of time because we have just scratched the surface. But I'm really grateful for the work we're doing together. I'm really excited about the possibility of making a difference in education, and I am grateful to you, Annie Kidder, for all that you've contributed and for taking the time to come from the big smoke to be with us here today.
Thank you very much.
I'm Terry Cooke. You've been watching Hamilton's Vital Signs. As always, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Hope you'll join us again next month. Have a great Christmas and Hanukkah. We'll see you in the new year.